was written from the heart. It was written as something that I think was very positive for the world and for us. And we don't want to hurt countries that don't need to be hurt. And they all want to negotiate. The only problem is, you know, you can only do so many at one time. It's like, we want to do it right. We want to get it right. I think President Xi is a very smart guy, and I think we'll end up making a very good deal for both. But, you know, we've been treated so badly for so many years. Again, we allowed that to happen.
In Beijing, I mean, we know that the policymakers there have been preparing for this sort of scenario, a second Trump term, an all-out trade war, for many, many years now. And the simple calculation is that basically the United States needs China more than China needs the United States.
The United States is still imposing tariffs on China, and China is firmly opposed to such bullying. China will absolutely not accept pressure, threats, and blackmail. That is not the right way to deal with China. If the US side really wants to talk, it should show an attitude of equality, respect, and reciprocity. If the United States ignores the interests of the two countries and the international community and insists on fighting a tariff war and a trade war, China will certainly accompany it to the end.
It all started with soybeans, but it won't end there. In just 72 hours, China didn't just cancel shipments, they torched $57 billion of American trade like it was nothing.
Escalation. It is hitting the fan. Whatever it is, but it has hit the fan again and continued on here today.
While U.S. farmers scrambled, Wall Street shook, and Washington watched paralyzed, China made its next move.
The unilateral tariff hikes by the US violate WTO rules, harm the common interests of people of all countries, and do not help solve the problems of the US itself. It is clear to everyone that more and more countries are opposing the US's unilateral bullying actions, such as imposing tariffs.
And if you're thinking this was just about pork and crops, you're not paying attention. The real target? The US dollar itself. And trust me, you won't believe just how it all started. No international summit, no backroom diplomacy, not even a televised announcement. It all started with a tweet. Yes, a tweet. A few sentences fired off into cyberspace ended up detonating a $57 billion grenade right into the heart of the American economy. The date? February 1st, 2025. The culprit? Donald J. Trump. Here's what he posted on X. Today, I have implemented a 25% tariff on imports from Mexico and Canada, 10% on Canadian energy, and a 10% additional tariff on China. This was done through the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, because of the major threat of illegal aliens and deadly drugs killing our citizens, including fentanyl. We need to protect Americans, and it is my duty as president to ensure the safety of all. I made a promise on my campaign to stop the flood of illegal aliens and drugs from pouring across our borders, and Americans overwhelmingly voted in favor of it. In that moment, the world blinked, stock markets twitched, allies fumed, and China? Oh, China didn't just sit quietly.
中国人不惹事，也不怕事。施压、威胁和讹诈不是同中方打交道的正确方式。中方必将采取必要措施，坚决维护自身正当合法权益。如果美方置两国和国际社会的利益于不顾，执意打关税战、贸易战，中方必将奉陪到。
10 days later, on February 10th, they fired back with surgical precision, slapping 15% tariffs on U.S. coal and liquefied natural gas, and 10% tariffs on American oil and agricultural machinery. And just when you thought the tariff roller coaster was over, Trump dropped another bomb on March 26, 2025. He slapped a 25% tariff on every single imported car, waving the flag of national security like it was NASCAR weekend. This move came straight out of Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, because nothing says protect America like taxing your next Toyota or Tesla built overseas.
I think it's going very well. It was an operation like when a patient gets operated on, and it's a big thing. I said this would exactly be the way it is. We have $6 or $7 trillion coming into our country, and we've never seen anything like it. The markets are going to boom, the stock is going to boom, the country is going to boom.
The goal? Force a manufacturing exodus out of China. Bring the factories home.
Clearly, we want to see an economy that's stronger and more robust, where you've got more jobs being created in this country, and you know, the income gap in this country closing as we create better paying jobs in a lot of places around the country that have suffered as a result of the loss of the manufacturing base that we've had here for a long time.
Oh, and to reassert American industrial dominance.
I think they're kind of having to get used to that this is how Trump operates, and we could still well see a recession. But I think that he's hoping to have more announcements of new manufacturing facilities in the U.S., but it just makes it very hard for companies who have long-term planning to actually make investments in the U.S. And abroad, because they see that policy just changes on a dime.
And Daniel, what are you hearing? You know, what's the gossip about how all this has been going down in the White House in terms of the team?
Within weeks, the US-China trade war escalated into a full-blown economic slugfest, but China wasn't rattled. And here is why.
The simple calculation is that basically the United States needs China more than China needs the United States. If American consumers aren't going to buy Chinese goods, cheap Chinese goods, where are they going to buy them from? If American farmers aren't going to sell to China, where are they going to sell to? And the thinking goes that the Chinese manufacturers can sell to their own vast domestic market. They can sell to other countries. Can the United States quite do the same? That is the thinking, of course. So we're going to have to see clearly how this plays out. That is basically what underpinned Trump's entire philosophy in the first place, that the US is too reliant on China. And this is why he's come in with these, you know, sort of sledgehammer tariffs. China is by far the most important player, not just in the regional economy, but in the world economy when it comes to United States trade policy.
In March, Beijing responded with chilling precision. A 34% retaliatory tariff aimed directly at US agriculture.
Is China retaliating, announcing additional tariffs, 34% tariffs on all imports from the U.S. starting April 10th. They didn't waste any time dropping this headline. It's the next day, and we're dropping the headline of more tariffs, trade war, full engage.
Not tech, not steel, but food, the very backbone of America's export economy.
China has delivered on its promise to strike back at U.S. reciprocal tariffs, Beijing announcing a slew of additional duties and restrictions against American goods. That includes a 34% levy on all imports starting next Thursday. 34% was also the rate that President Donald Trump slapped on China 2 days ago. This coming on top of existing 20% tariffs.
Now, here is where pork comes into picture. The U.S. pork industry is tightly tied to China, especially since African swine fever decimated China's herds in 2018 to 2019, creating a boom for U.S. pork exports. Now, with China pulling back and turning to other partners, U.S. pork producers are losing one of their biggest customers, contributing to the $57 billion in overall agricultural losses. And let's be honest, that should not and did not sit well with Trump.
China says in order to have substantive negotiations, you have to bring down your 145% tariffs. Are you open to pulling back your tariffs in order to get China to the negotiating table?
No.
On April 2nd, 2025, he signed Executive Order 14,257, rolling out what he boldly dubbed the Liberation Day tariffs.
I'm not going to say, oh, I'm going to play hardball with China. I'm going to play hardball with you, President Xi. No. We're going to be very nice. They're going to be very nice.
And then, of course, took to X to make things even louder. Yesterday, China issued retaliatory tariffs of 34%, on top of their already record-setting tariffs, non-monetary tariffs, illegal subsidization of companies, and massive long-term currency manipulation, despite my warning that any country that retaliates against the US by issuing additional tariffs above and beyond their already existing long-term tariff abuse of our nation, will be immediately met with new and substantially higher tariffs over and above those initially set. Therefore, if China does not withdraw its 34% increase above their already long-term trading abuses, by tomorrow, April 8th, 2025, the United States will impose additional tariffs on China of 50%, effective April 9th. Additionally, all talks with China concerning their requested meetings with us will be terminated. Negotiations with other countries, which have also requested meetings, will begin taking place immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter. One would think Trump would be joking, but no, he was as serious as a heart attack with his threats. At least his senators thought so.
Leader Thun, with respect to tariffs, the White House has said that an additional 50% tariff will go on China if retaliatory tariffs by China are not taken down. This means that, according to some estimates, the tariffs could reach as high as 104%. What do you say to that, and what do you say to the markets in particular, which are very rattled by all of these tariffs?
Well, look, and I think you all covered this place long enough. I think everybody kind of knows my views on tariffs, but the fact of the matter is the president ran on this. There wasn't a campaign event where he didn't talk about the importance of getting other countries to treat us more fairly when it comes to trade, bilateral trade, multilateral trade in this country. And 77 million people voted for him and his agenda. And I think he deserves the opportunity to see what kind of deals he can get from some of our trading partners. And I think most of us are giving him the space in which to do that, and hope that he is successful, because that's good for not only for him and his administration, but it's good for the country.
Trump's purpose with his threats was to weaken the position of China so they could negotiate on his terms.
Given how important, though, the Chinese market is, specifically to South Dakota soybean exporters, how concerned are you that China says it's going to fight until the end, indicating that they may not reach a deal for months or even longer than that?
Well, and I think there's a lot of rhetoric right now, but I'm hoping that in the end that the Chinese, like a lot of other countries, will come to the table. There is clearly, in my view, room for negotiation that would achieve the objectives the president has laid out, and it could be in the benefit of both the U.S. and China. But at this point, I think where we are right now in the process is the president has made it very clear that he wants changes made, starting with fentanyl and the precursors that the Chinese makes and then distributes and gets into this country. But I think there are other, reciprocal type trading policies that could be implemented.
He also tried to press on the fact that America was doing better after the tariffs, emphasizing that he had no plans for going back on his actions.
We were losing $1 trillion a year. Now we're not losing anything, That's the way I look at it. We were losing with China on trade $1 trillion a year. More, actually, 1.1. But let's say $1 trillion. You know what we're losing now? Nothing. That's not bad.
Sadly, Trump messed with the wrong country. China isn't one to take it sitting down.
The trade pattern between the United States and China is not going to be sustainable economically and politically. We're preparing for this, that we can't rely on the U.S. market forever. The party is going to end. This probably is going to end a little bit earlier than a lot of people expect.
And it most certainly was going to retaliate in some way. So in the same month, at exactly 2:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, China issued a stunning directive: cancel all U.S. soybean imports, effective immediately.
China has responded to Trump's import taxes with a 34% retaliatory tariff on all U.S. goods entering China. One industry that could be hit hard is farming.
And more tariffs could mean more trouble for Iowa farmers. The latest rates with China means that some of the state's biggest ag exports could be staying at home and could be costing farmers a lot of money.
Over 2.4 million metric tons of soybeans, already en route across the Pacific, were turned away mid-voyage. Some ships were rerouted to Brazil. Others circled aimlessly at sea with nowhere to dock. The contracts? Obliterated. A staggering $1.1 billion evaporated in hours. For the American farmer, this wasn't just economic warfare. It was personal.
China buys more than all the other countries combined.
Farmers' plans are made years in advance, and changes are not made quickly. Regardless of the tariff, seeds like this will be planted in the fields in the next week.
We want to make sure there's fair trade for everyone and every product. We're hoping that there's a way that that can be done without hurting acres. We just want to be able to keep surviving and passing our farms down from generation to generation.
Soybeans aren't just a cash crop, they're a lifeline. Nearly 60% of U.S. soybean exports used to go straight to China.
We are dependent on trade. Right at 50% of the soybeans produced in the United States are exported. China takes more of our soybeans than all other foreign customers combined. So they're a major part of our market.
No matter what size you are, these are real impactful tariffs, no matter what size you are. So we need China to come to the table, and that's for the politicians to figure out, of course, but they were our #1 buyer for quite a long time.
Entire towns across Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana survive on those exports. And now, buyers vanished. Silos overflowed, prices tanked.
Here it is planting season right now, and farmers should be getting in the field, planting corn and things of this nature. And the president announced these tariffs. Every time he says the word tariffs, the prices decline. Many Americans don't understand that farmers, we are price takers, so we don't set the markets. And many Americans say, well, why don't farmers just, raise their prices? We can't. It's dictated to us by the market. So the prices have declined for the 3 major commodities that are facing us right now. Corn, wheat, and soybeans are all down, and farmers depend on those 3 commodities to hold on to our farms. So farmers right now are facing really, really trying times, and the president is going to put a lot of farmers out of business like this based on these announcements and tariffs.
Commodity markets recoiled. The Chicago Board of Trade saw soybean futures plummet 17% in 48 hours, wiping out months of gains. Farm lenders panicked. Equipment loans got frozen. Insurance claims surged.
We're already at a disadvantage, and then we throw the tariffs on top, then that's just not a good marketplace to be in. And part of this is, too, we're not, world production leaders anymore in soybeans, so we've kind of taken second or third fiddle on the soybean production side.
Soybeans, corn, wheat, and pork, once dependable, billion-dollar exports became financial liabilities.
I think at the moment what we're looking at is uncertainty, financial concern, and the very real possibility of a potential global recession. That is what financial analysts are pointing to this morning. At this global rollout of that baseline 10% tariffs on all US imports, as you said, came in at midnight Eastern time. The first countries we know to be hit are Britain, Australia, Colombia, Argentina, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. And I think we need to focus some understanding on China's response, because it faces a 34% tariff rise from the US, and it has become the first country to issue retaliatory tariffs. From next Thursday, it says like for like 34% tariffs on all US goods coming into China. And Marianne, those retaliatory tariffs from China will hit US agriculture. We know last month it had already imposed tariffs of 10% to 15% on US goods, including chicken, wheat, corn, cotton. So what we're seeing today is the world's 2 biggest economies, China and the US, now being plunged into a trade war.
Rural America, the silent powerhouse behind U.S. exports, was suddenly under siege. This wasn't just a trade war anymore. It was a financial ambush.
We saw China here really showing the breadth and depth of its firepower, and its state media is talking about how 11 arrows were fired back at the US, and we saw a flurry of announcements this evening from the State Council Tariff Commission, the Ministry of Commerce, as well as China's customs. Besides the blanket tit-for-tat 34% tariffs on all American products, we are also seeing other existing levers that China has used in the past be escalated. We are talking about export control on more rare earth related items, and these are key materials that are being used in the production of high-tech products like computer chips or electric vehicle batteries. Remember also that the US had put in place those export controls on its own advanced technology and semiconductor manufacturing items to stop it from being exported to China. Now, agricultural products also being targeted in China's response. Customs suspending imports of chicken, sorghum from certain American firms. Close to 30 American firms and entities either being added to an unreliable entities list or to an export control list. And China has announced that it has filed a lawsuit with the World Trade Organization, the Commerce Ministry, in a statement saying that the reciprocal tariffs levied by the U.S. seriously violate WTO rules and damages the rights and interests of WTO members. The Beijing calling it, quote, typical unilateral bullying practice that endangers the stability of the global economic and trade order. Very clear where China stands on this, Wei Su.
Farmers who'd already been bruised by inflation, climate shocks, and razor-thin profit margins now found themselves on the front lines of a geopolitical crossfire.
First and foremost, everybody is, desire to make money and make a profit, but then after that, it probably falls to break-even point. And then after that, I think if you do want to make some sales, you just have to pick a number and hope that number is gonna be the right number for you, because there again, this price could go back up or it could go down. We have no idea at this point.
He announced his tariffs against China in 2018. I was getting $16.80 a bushel for a bushel of soybeans. That price plummeted to $6. So I'm asking the president, did he really have success in his proposed tariffs on China? So they said the government is gonna bail out America's farmers. That's paperwork. Farmers are time sensitive. 30 to 45 days to plant your crop, 30 to 45 days to harvest it. And the president came in and put a halt on farm loans. Many farmers don't have a farm operating loan in place. Right. He froze grants, and he's closing up the offices. The very offices that he says is going to help bail out America's farmers, he's now firing these people and closing them up around the country.
Grain elevators filled with unsellable crops, cargo ships loaded with soybeans floated aimlessly, turned away from Chinese ports, insurance brokers scrambled, futures markets panicked, and thousands of contracts worth billions were wiped out in less than 72 hours. But here's the real twist. This wasn't just about soybeans. This was China signaling something much deeper. Dependence is weakness.
When it comes to the U.S., the tariff announcement came very swiftly, China showing that it is prepared to retaliate as it has said. But what analysts I have just spoken to have also said that even though China's response is very carefully calibrated, its response, the magnitude of it, is much stronger than some had expected as well. Because if you recall, in the last round of tariffs that had been levied by the U.S., we're talking about additional 20% tariffs on Chinese imports. China then retaliated with more selective counter tariffs, instead targeting a portion of American imports with duty slap on some agricultural, coal, and natural gas products of up to 15%. And we see China escalating the levers it has used previously. So what has changed? Analysts I've been speaking to saying that the U.S. duties that have come in the last few days have been higher.
For years, America believed it had the upper hand, feeding the world, including its biggest rival. But when China decided to cut off the tap, it didn't starve. Instead, it pivoted. Rather than continue relying on a single supplier, especially one actively trying to economically contain it, China quietly began building alternative supply lines. But it didn't do this alone. It brought a willing partner into the fold, Brazil. While Washington played hardball, Beijing focused on infrastructure, pouring a staggering $11.2 billion into strategic investments across South America. With one well-timed policy shift, China turned Brazil into its new breadbasket. The impact wasn't just about hurting America's bottom line, it was about replacing it altogether. Between 2020 and 2024, Brazil's soybean production didn't just grow, it exploded. With Chinese capital fueling the expansion, Brazil increased its soybean capacity by an astonishing 21%. In regions like Mato Grosso and Paraná, new rail lines cut through once remote farmland, drastically slashing the transport costs and speeding up exports directly to Chinese ports. And the payoff? It was nothing short of enormous. By mid-2025, Bloomberg reported that Brazil had become capable of supplying 70% of China's total soybean demand.
You know, the risk to U.S. soybean demand, Brazil's the #1 shop in town, and anybody that's going to go out there and price shop is going to go there first, or at least look there first for beans. But from a corn perspective,
this wasn't just competition, it was a complete replacement. The balance of global agriculture shifted dramatically, not over the course of years, but seemingly overnight. American farmers, who had long depended on China as their #1 buyer, now found themselves watching from the sidelines as Brazil stepped into the role they once held.
Competition is not hard to see. Who are the main competitors for those products? You have to turn our attention to South America.
Right.
So Brazil and Argentina, Brazil, especially Brazil for beans. Brazil is the largest exporter of beans, and in Argentina and Brazil are second and third largest exporter of corn. So there is a lot of competition.
What was once a secure trade relationship had now been handed off to the Southern Hemisphere, and Brazil didn't just seize an opportunity, it inherited an empire. For those who assumed this shift was a one-off, it quickly became clear they were mistaken. By the first quarter of 2025, U.S. corn exports to China had plummeted by 29%.
China is our main market for beans, for example. A lot of our corn goes to Asia, some to Africa. And if they retaliate, they're probably going to look for a different place to buy products if they're coming from the U.S. at a very high price now.
This was followed by another devastating blow when China signed a $2.6 billion corn deal with Brazil, further pushing American farmers out of the picture. But China's move didn't stop there. In a clear signal to global markets, Beijing began auctioning off its U.S. corn reserves, effectively sending a message: we're moving on, and the shift is irreversible. There have been attempts at U.S.-China negotiations, but oh well, who is on the shorter end of the stick? Not China for sure.
I don't think Beijing is desperate for a deal.
So does the U.S. have less leverage in your view now than it might have had in the first trade war?
If U.S. policymakers or if the Trump administrations think that it could, or America could, force China into a deal, I do not think that is going to happen. After all, think through the lens of Beijing and the case of the Panama Canal to the extent that it becomes a large public embarrassment, and this is not the leader of a great power wanting to be traded off. And a great leader do not want to come to a negotiation table with his
weak.
Exactly, or for that matter, with his hand tied. And if I can just conclude by saying that, if we look across the board, China realized that, if the United States is withdrawing from a lot of international institutions, and if the United States is actively, or the current administration is actively potentially sabotaging the role of the US dollar and sabotaging Americans' alliance system, and America is trying to redefine the international order, perhaps China is going to do exactly the opposite. And I think the message has been clear. In a lot of ways, the Trump administration offered Beijing, offered Xi Jinping and his cadres ways to walk back some of China's economic policy missteps without being embarrassed or without having to admit wrongdoing. So from that perspective, if I were Beijing, why am I going to desperate for a deal? I'm not going to.
This dramatic change raises an even bigger question. What's next? If China can make this kind of seismic shift in agriculture, what happens when it turns its attention to other critical sectors like semiconductors, rare earth elements, or U.S. treasuries? Could this be the beginning of a much bigger move against American dominance? We'll be watching closely.
I think that China is playing the game. China knows that if you are going to disrupt the supply chain and you're going to ask American businesses to find different products that they've been using, Chinese products for years, that it can take years sometimes to find those replacements. And I think that they know that. They also are very resourceful. They have better technology than we do. I think that there's so many things that China understands they have the higher end, the upper hand on. And I actually think that they're just playing this game, that they want Trump to feel that he messed up and that they're going to make him beg a bit for him to come back. And so that's why I think this is all a distraction. I think this is a distraction. He wants Americans to feel more security. But right now, I think that Americans feel so much, this has stoked so much fear because we don't have the belief that you're going to be able to really bring back these tariffs, what you're dealing with China.
So what's your take on all of this? Do you think the dollar's days are numbered? Let us know in the comments, and make sure to subscribe to stay ahead of this rapidly unfolding global economic battle.